Do you need a safe place to connect with other creatives? I have a membership group called the Inner Circle of Small Beginnings, and it may be just the membership community that you have been looking for. It is safe, it is full of joy, full of caring people, and just so special. God's presence actually comes and rests on us as we meet together on live Zoom. I have people in this group from Australia to Africa and all over the United States. So it's a membership group where God is in the center of my weekly live teachings, all relevant about growing our relationship with Jesus and our increased faith in our daily creative walk. Y'all, here are some quotes from some of my members. This group has just been a delight. Here's another one. I really like Mondays now. Hey, we meet on Mondays. And I really like how Spirit-led you are. So y'all, my wait list is open now. Click on the link in the show notes. The doors will be open only for a limited amount of time. So get on my wait list now for my private membership called Inner Circle of Small Beginnings with Sarah. And we will send you a free PDF of my favorite Bible translations. You're going to be so blessed that you made the decision to become a member.
Plant a seed, no one knows what it will be. Watch it grow, watch it grow, watch it grow, watch it grow. Your small beginning.
Well, y'all, I'm so excited to have Michelle Hagen with me today, and she is a new friend. You know, sometimes we think we don't live in the same town, the same city, the same state even, and then we meet these people that we are so connected with. And Michelle is one of these people that God put in my life. When I heard God tell me in early March that I was to start a podcast, and I said to God, we have not talked about this, and He said, you have everything you need. And Michelle Hagen is one of the things that I needed. This person helped me launch my podcast and held my hand to get everything set up. And God sent her to me electronically, you know, by Zoom and Messenger. And she lives in Nebraska. And so we actually got to meet a few weeks ago. She came to my home for lunch, and it was so beautiful to spend time with her. And I asked her that day, would you be on my podcast? And so today I have Michelle. I want her to say hi, and then I want to just say a prayer for all that God wants to do. Yeah, so welcome, Michelle.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And yes, it is amazing. I think how you're talking about that there's like this digital connection, and like right now we're in a season where everyone feels so disconnected, but there's amazing things that can happen when like you just actually reach out to people. And I'm so glad that you and I have met. It's almost been like a year and a half now since we like I guess you can call it like officially met online.
Right.
But yeah, it has been, and it's been such a beautiful friendship, and how you and I always have like the perfect words for each other that God sends us when we need each other.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I would like to pray. Are you okay with that? And then just
Yeah.
ask God to guide this podcast. Lord, I thank you so much for Michelle, and I thank you for this time and this space that we can connect, and really we want to hear your words. Lord, what does my audience and what does Michelle's audience, because she'll likely use this with her audience as well, what do you want us to share that would be inspiring and encouraging and really help us feel your love and your blessing in our life wherever we are, whatever stage we're in, whatever season we're in. So Lord, would you guide this conversation? Would you just give Michelle the words that would be right from your heart, that would touch the people that will listen to this in the days and months and years to come? So thank you, Jesus, for being with us. We love you, and we just say, have your way. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I'd just like you to get started, with, I'm about small beginnings. And this beautiful verse that God's shown me, that He does not despise small beginnings, but He actually rejoices to see us see the work begin. So to see us start something. And also, as we go step by step. And so you've done a lot. You're a mom, you're a wife, you are an amazing friend to so many, and you have your own podcast and you have, a lot going on. So just start wherever you want to. Tell us your story.
Yeah. Okay. So, I guess I should back up. Before I had kids, I worked in the insurance industry. I've actually had my insurance license for almost 10 years now. And I always thought that I was going to climb the corporate ladder
Hmm.
of the insurance world because that's what my dad did. My dad's really successful. And it just made sense for me to follow in his footsteps because it would have been one of those paths that was like the easy path where when my dad retires, I could have probably easily taken his job or, been his successor type of thing.
Right.
And I was very good at selling insurance. I still am. I still do it here and there. Um, but after I had Thatcher, who's my second, so I have two boys. Turner's 5 and Thatcher is 3.
Hmm.
And after Turner, I went back to work and I kept being at my desk when I was pregnant with Thatcher, thinking to myself, there has to be more to life than this. Like, I literally felt like my soul was just being sucked from me. And I would sit at my desk, and on days when I would have nothing to do, I would be sitting there and thinking to myself, I'm missing out on what my son is doing right now because my boss is requiring me to be sitting at my desk, even though I have nothing to do.
Wow.
And I just kept thinking I was like, there's got to be more than this. Like, this just doesn't feel right. And so after I had Thatcher, I never thought that I would not go back to work. And after I had him, the postpartum set in really bad. And it's interesting because I got to the point where I was like Googling symptoms of postpartum, which I've now learned like if you're Googling the symptoms of something, you probably have it. Like if you're a mom and you are having a really hard time and you're crying and you're like Googling the symptoms of postpartum. And so I was Googling the symptoms of postpartum, and a lot of the times with postpartum, you hear women like can't get out of bed, they don't want to be with their baby. And that was not how I was because I had no choice but to get up out of bed and to take Turner to school and, or to daycare and to be doing these things. And what I realized was I had postpartum and anxiety. I never knew that postpartum anxiety was a thing. And I never really understood what anxiety was until I had it because I would like literally be standing at the top of my stairs holding Thatcher and I would be terrified to walk down because I was afraid that I was going to drop him
Wow.
and that he would die. Or there was just things and I just would get angry. And so my postpartum was just so hard. And I knew that I couldn't go back to the job that I was in because it was very stressful. And so I was praying to God one day as I'm brushing my teeth in my bathroom. And I was like, God, what am I supposed to do? I had the thoughts of like, maybe I'm not going to go back to work. Maybe I should be looking for something else. And I clearly heard God say to me, you're going to stay home. And it was one of those things. And it was probably the first time where I was conscious that I was hearing God talk to me because it was literally like it was not my own thoughts.
Wow.
And so I was like, okay. And so I told my husband that day, I was like, God told me that I'm staying home. I don't really know how. I don't know how we're going to pay for anything because at that time we were living in a way that we just assumed like we needed to have my salary.
Right.
So we had said, okay, well, we have enough in savings that we could make this work for like 2 or 3 months. And after 3 months, when my maternity leave was over, so Thatcher would be like 6 months, and I'll go back to work and I'll just kind of be looking for stuff as we go. And so this whole time I kept searching, like, okay, God, what are you going to have me do next? What are you having me do next? God, I'm not seeing what you want me to do. And God just kind of kept putting in my heart, like, you're going to have your own business. You're going to do something on your own. But you got to wait. And so these job opportunities would come and go, and they were in the insurance world, and they were opportunities where like my dad or my husband would be like, how are you saying no? Why are you saying no to this? And I was like, I don't know. God's just telling me no. I don't know why, but I just feel like it's supposed to be no. And God kept saying to me, there's something planned, like you just have to wait.
Wow.
Like there's a reason that you're not doing anything. Because even in this part, I was like, well, God, what am I don't understand why you're not sending me what I'm supposed to be doing. And looking back, I wish that I would have been more present in that season
Hmm.
of the waiting, which I think all of us always say, like, gosh, if I just could have just been content in the waiting. But I think now I'm a little bit more content when things aren't moving as quickly. But I just heard God saying to me, like, I will tell you when it's time to go. And there's a reason, and you're going to know.
That's so good. So, this idea of us waiting for what we do not yet know, but we know something is coming, would you consider that faith? Like you were in the waiting to know something was coming, but not really having the evidence of it?
Mm. Oh, it was 100% walking by like blind faith.
Yes.
And even in paying for our bills, because we had said like, okay, we had 3 months, but somehow it's like we reworked our budget, or I would do a couple insurance, like kind of, I guess you can call them freelance type things, where I would do like some employee benefit stuff and I would make some money, and that would help. But it was always, and still always has been, even through COVID, God was like, I will take care of you. Like I will take care of it. And we've never had a time where I'm like, we don't know how we're going to pay our mortgage this month. We've never had that. And there's always been times where, yes, we've had to ask for help from my parents a couple times, but there's never been a time where like the bills didn't go unpaid.
Right.
Um, and and for a while I had a hard time, even when like we had to ask my parents a couple times, like, we need some help. And God has spoken to me because, like, when you're like in your 30, I'm 30, 32. I think it's my birthday at the end of the month. I think I'm
Oh.
going to be 32. But, I feel like once you get past 30, you just stop counting. But that, like, you don't want to ask for help from
Right.
people.
Right.
And you're like, how am I 30? And I'm needing to ask my dad to help me. But what I have learned to sit into in this season is that God was like, listen, I gave your dad that money because I knew you needed it.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
it's not like I had to be okay that I'm not a bad person and I'm not unsuccessful because I asked for help.
Right.
It's that God was like, I already knew that this was going to
Mhm.
happen. And like, I've already set it up so that the money was going to be there when you
Mhm.
needed it. Um,
That's beautiful.
so
Mm.
so I think like it's in the waiting and having the blind faith. And one of the things that God did in the waiting that I didn't know was going to happen is one of Jake and I's they have been our mentors our whole life. And we were part of Youth for Christ, and the guy that ran it, him and his wife became really close to Jake and I. And she got cancer, and then during my maternity leave, she got cancer again.
Oh.
And I had this feeling on my heart that God was like, this is what I told you to wait for. And I've never actually shared this story, but like publicly. So this may, like how you're saying that God is saying to share it.
Yes.
Um, God told me, I've been holding you for this. And I felt really called to help create a fundraiser for them.
Oh.
And it was a fundraiser that the things that happened and the people that came forward and gave and donated and what we created could not have happened without God. And I was just like the conduit that needed to make the phone
Yes.
calls and needed to do the
Yeah.
things.
Mm.
And we raised a substantial amount of money. And after that, it was one of those, things that I was like, okay, like we raised all this money, and I can remember when this was in the season of that we really didn't have, we were struggling a little bit financially and trying to figure out. And I can remember the day, like I was the one that held all the money. So here I was with thousands of dollars,
Mm-hmm.
and to hand it over to somebody else when I was like, I don't even know how we're going to pay our mortgage this
Mm-hmm.
month. But that God was showing me, like, I told you to trust me and to be faithful to me. And, that money went towards to some of her treatments. And in that time, it was 2 years ago, we thought she would only have months, and she's still alive today. And,
Oh, wow.
she's still fighting,
Yeah.
but it's just been amazing what God has done in that season. And so I had like this season of waiting and being faithful, and God showed me like, okay, I knew that I needed you to do this.
Wow.
And after that, that's when I heard God was like, okay, it's time to go now, and you're going to start
Mm-hmm.
doing your own thing.
Michelle, can you talk just a minute about postpartum and how
Mhm.
I know you've done some podcasts on this, but just in a few sentences, like for if someone out there hears this and is experiencing it, or even knows a family member or friend that's going through it, what do you do? What's advice to do?
I think that I would say, like, don't be afraid to ask for help, and that you have to be your own advocate, and that you also have to be the advocate for your friends. Because a lot of times, like I said before, like I was Googling the symptoms, and I thought, but no one wants to admit that, you have postpartum, or
Right.
that wants to admit these thoughts that are going through your head. Because I had some real like dark thoughts there of like that were things that I was like, I can't tell anybody I'm thinking these things.
Mhm.
To know that like it's okay to ask for help. And it's one of those things that, yes, God can provide like miraculous healings, and to pray to God to ask Him to help you to be better. But you also need to ask God, what treatment do I need to seek?
Okay.
Because this is what I believe of like what God showed me. Like He created doctors to make medicine that can help people, or He's like created a place for people to heal, and that each person's healing is going to look different.
Yes.
So like what worked for one person might not work for another. And that if women are struggling, it's one of those things, I think, that going to like a counselor or going to talk to someone is also really taboo. And even in that season, I can remember I didn't want to take medicine to start with. Jake was like, you need to go talk to somebody. And my doctor had encouraged it. And I was like, fine, whatever. This isn't going to help me. I don't know why you people think that this is helpful, but I will go to appease. And I went, and it all came rushing out. And so it's also one of those things like for people to hear that, as hard as it is to like walk into an office and tell someone like what you're struggling with, like you need to let it out, because the longer you keep it in, it just gets worse and worse and builds up.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to like reach out and ask somebody for help. And you have to be brave in the fact that sometimes you're going to have to take some steps in healing that you might not want to take, but God already knew that you were going to need to walk these steps, and He
Mhm.
has a plan for your healing.
Mm. Thank you so much. I know that is going to be very helpful because it's way more common than people think.
Just like there's Becky Thompson, who I had her on my podcast, and she talks about anxiety a lot, and
Mhm.
it's a medical condition.
Right.
And she even talks just like we would never judge our pastor for putting glasses on to read his sermon, and we would never judge a diabetic for taking insulin to keep them alive.
Right.
That literally what's happening, especially postpartum, it's hormonal. There's literally nothing you can do. And I can remember my dad, he was like, well, like what caused this? Like, well, how do you like, well, what do you make it better? Because we're very much like, okay, what's the problem? How do we solve
Let's
it? We
fix
take the
it. Yeah.
steps and we move on. And and it was also one of those things to submit to and realize like, I didn't do anything to cause this.
Right.
And that's what I think women need to realize, that you're not a bad mom because that happened to you. You're not bad at anything. It's just literally something that happens, like, to the hormones in your
Right.
body that causes it.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Hey, y'all, I wanted to tell you about my e-course, 100 Days Creating with God. I believe it is the single most important course you can take. It's a great starting place. See, because I believe that you have to develop a daily discipline before you can move into the artist that God wants you to be. Now, some of you may be doing artistic work with paints, but others of you may be starting a flower garden. You also may be cleaning out drawers and getting organized, and that may be your place of creativity. God says He made us in His image, and He is the great creator, then we were made to create too. And so my e-course, 100 Days Creating with God, is a great start for you. It will help you to develop your daily discipline. First, you'll have some inner changes inside of you. You'll connect with God and His holy word in new ways. And then secondly, you will develop your skill set as a creative. I will set up the rhythms for you where you will be spending time with God every day for 100 days. It will change your life. So consider taking my e-course, 100 Days Creating with God. So now we are moving forward to your did the fundraiser for your friend, and God showed you a lot in that you could be successful, and you were faithful and trustworthy. And then the next steps, and you have 2 sons. You have 2 little ones. And figuring out the finances, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and 2 little ones that are, like, wild and crazy. Like, to the point, like, to the mom, like, I'm the mom that had to put a chain lock on the front door because while I was nursing, Thatcher Turner, who was 2, was, like, escaping out the front yard or, like, getting out of the places. Like, I am, like, I always, like, joke to people, I'm the hot mess mom. Like, when they were little, I was literally the one that was like, "I'm here, we're all here. I don't know if we all have shoes on, teeth might not be brushed, but we're here," and, like, we're on time, like, scooting in just on time. Um, but yeah, and having the boys and trying to navigate, like, what am I going to do, was hard because the postpartum, and what people also don't realize is we think that, oh, postpartum is like when the baby is little and then you'll get over it and you'll be fine. And that's not actually how it is at all.
Mhm.
For me, it lasted for quite a while. Then I felt better. And then um, something happened and it kind of like came back, in waves, but it also was hormones changing.
Mhm.
It has so much to do, especially if you're nursing, your hormones are changing all the time. And so I had like waves of it come where I would be okay for a while and waves of it would come. I would have to say that just in the last year, so Thatcher's 3, or no, is he 3? Yeah, he's 3. He's gonna be 4. Just like in the last year, do I feel like I finally came up for air to
Wow.
breathe. I think that we think that women have to, okay, you went to a counselor, you took some medication, you should be fine. And the little years are so hard, and I think that we don't give women enough credit in that of how hard they are. That society says like, "Okay, well, you have 2 kids, but you should have a clean house and run your business and have all these things put together." That's not what real life really looks like,
Right.
and I'm finally at this part of motherhood where I feel like I've, like, come up, like, I finally have taken this big breath of air and my head doesn't go underwater like it did, and even to the fact of my best friend, she has 2 kids as well, but she's like the opposite. So her oldest is Thatcher's age. So Ellie's 3. And then she has, Ari is 2. And she said to me the other day, she's like, I just feel like I'm not coming up. I just, it's just like, you feel like you're constantly, and I was like, it's going to get better.
Yes.
And it's crazy to look back because I remember those feelings so vividly that you're like, I'm never going to get through this. Is this like who I am going to be for the rest of my life? Like a crazy hot mess, like, and I smell like, because we get so lost and we look at ourselves in the mirror and are like, who is this person? Like, I don't even know who you are anymore. You used to have all these ambitions and want to do all these things. And in that season of 3 years, because really for me, it happened when I had the 2. I was good when it was just the 1. It was after the 2. And so really for that like 2.5, almost 3 years, I was like, I don't even know who this person is. Like I was just this hollow, almost like a hollow shell of myself. And I can now look at other women and I see it in them. And it's like, I promise it feels like this just lasts forever and that it's never going to end. But it's hard when you're in it to hear someone else say to you, but I promise you, like, you're going to come up for air again. And you're going to look in the mirror one day and be like, oh, hey girl, there you are. Like you are still there. Like she's still inside you. She's fighting to come back. But I promise you, like, she's going to come back. It's just no one tells us how hard like the baby years are.
Yeah. Yeah. So good, Michelle. Yes. What else do you want to share with us? Sort of where you are now. Tell us about your podcast and sort of your small beginnings.
In all of this, in like the whirlwind of what the last 3 years were, and probably I want to say it was in like the last 2 years. So that like maybe when Thatcher was about 2, I just heard God say, like, you're going to speak to people. You're going to start your own thing and you're going to speak to people. And I was like, okay, like in what way? Like, can you give me a little bit more guidance here? And so at that time I was like, okay, am I going to be speaking like through a blog? Because a lot of the people I had followed, Becky Thompson is one of them, and she's an amazing Christian author. She had started like this blogs to books course. And so I had bought that and I was like, am I supposed to blog? But I'm dyslexic, God, like, what are you, like, I'm not supposed to write. And he just kept saying, you're going to speak to people. You're going to speak to people. And I was like, okay, I still don't understand how. And this course came up, which that's how you and I met,
right?
A business course. And in that I was searching and I knew that I needed like some foundational stepping stone pieces. And it was one of those things where I was like, this is what I need to be taking. And it's interesting that I thought I was taking it because I needed the business education in it, which was all amazing. And I have learned so much in the last 1.5 2 years on top of the business education that I already had. But what God needed me to do in that season was to connect with the people that I now have in my life. And I kept trying things that other people were kind of saying, like, well, this is what you should be doing. Like, this is the next new thing of online business, and this is what you should be building. And I was like, this just doesn't feel right. And I think one of the things that we have to remember is sometimes like we hear God give us the end goal. Like the end goal, I think, is stages and to be speaking to groups of women. Like that's what I see. And I hope that I'm seeing that because that's what God is saying, not because like that's what my heart wants.
Right.
But sometimes it's just the like small pivots that we just have to keep making. Okay, God, like, is this the right path? And listening and being like, nope, that's not the path I'm supposed to be going down. And we pivot a little bit more. And so that's where the podcast for me came from. In the middle of quarantine, I just kind of decided, I was like, God keeps telling me to speak to people. And the only way I can speak to people right now is by making a podcast. That's speaking and using my voice. And I just really clearly like kept hearing God say like, no, you are like physically speaking to people. And so that's where the podcast came from. And it was one of those things that I decided the beginning of April, I'm going to start a podcast. Kind of started researching how do I do that. By May 4th, I launched my podcast.
Woohoo!
And it's interesting because May 4th was the day that I went back to work when I had Turner.
Wow.
And so it's just this really interesting thing of, I think, dates that God was even showing me. Like, you're going to start this podcast on May 4th because, this whole journey of motherhood and like working and being a mom all started on May 4th.
Wow.
And so I just kind of do what I can in the middle of motherhood. I know that my like priorities should be God, family, and then business. And so there are days where I'm like, I probably should be working, but I just really want to be with the boys, or the boys asked to go to the park or go to the zoo or to go on a hike and do something. And I know that the season is so short that if that's what they ask, I do it, because
Awesome.
I know that the years of school are going to come before I know it. It's like, they tell you blink, and then I sent Turner to kindergarten, and it's just, it's just crazy. It goes so fast. And so I know I mentioned before how I wish that I would have enjoyed those waiting years a little bit more.
Mhm.
And even in business right now, I think that people think that we have to go so fast and we have to like sprint and make success as fast as we possibly can. And I'm really realizing like God has a plan, and my success doesn't have to look like anyone else's. I don't have to earn as much money as anybody else does. As long as I'm continually being faithful and taking steps forward, that's all He's asking me to do. And that's where the waiting now, I've tried to be really faithful in the fact of like, I want to go 100 miles a minute because that's how my business brain Enneagram 3 works.
Yeah.
But I know that God is like, listen, this season of them being little is short. It's
Yes.
really short. And um, even in the seasons of when our kids are little babies and we're nursing, we think like, I'm going to be nursing this baby until they go to kindergarten. I'm never going to be done nursing, when they won't wean. And then we look back and you're like, gosh, in the grand scheme of my life, that year and a half, 2 years that I nursed was so short.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so I'm just really trying to sit into building my business in between the moments of motherhood right now, because that's what God is calling me to do. He's not calling me to be running a sprint. He's just asking me to do what I can, and that it's His plan, and to surrender to that.
Wow. I love that so much, Michelle. I know when you came to my house a few weeks ago, I really felt like God gave you so much wisdom for me to say, why are you working so hard? Like, I've been sprinting.
Mhm.
Just this reflection of asking this question and trusting God in the plan, and also in the precious moments and the times of being present with the presence He's given you, which are your sons and your husband, and spending time as a family and with friends. That's so good. So good. And I just think your example is amazing, because somehow the world, I've picked up on it, sprint, 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 sprint. Just keep going, keep going, keep going.
Mhm.
And I don't think that that has been the healthiest choices for me. And you helped me sort of ask some deep questions, and I'm so appreciative for that. A few weeks ago, to think about my business and what do I want it to look like, and just appreciating and being satisfied with where I am right now today.
Yeah, so another thought that just kind of, as you're talking about that and the sprinting, and how I just like felt so full force with you to say like, you're going too hard, like you're, like just be in what you have.
Hmm.
I think in this season, especially of as we were in quarantine, we got to spend time together like as a family. And even Jake and I, we're together more than we ever have been in our 15 years of like dating,
Oh,
of being
so
together,
cool.
and I just kept saying, I think because of quarantine, someone is going to say, I got more time with my mom, my dad, my grandma, like we got more
Mhm,
time with them because
mhm,
we were forced to stop.
mhm.
And I'm seeing people, so like we were in quarantine and how much relief people had when they were like, oh, it's so great. Like we don't have to go to a sporting event every weekend. We don't have to do all of these things. Like never in probably so many people's lives did they look at their calendar and it was blank.
Yes.
Right? Like there's always like all this stuff that we had, but there was just like this time where it was never like you didn't have to be committed to anything if you
Right.
didn't want to. And I think like as time went on, a lot of people like we got weary in that, which I mean, we can all say like we wanted to go somewhere and do something. But as we're kind of coming into this new normal
Yes.
of
Mhm.
people are kind of going back to doing activities, I'm seeing so many people jump back into full force of like, well, we have to go back to doing soccer and then they have karate and then they have music lessons and then we have this and that. I keep like hearing God say, like, remind the people like what I did in that time of nothingness, that's when they could like breathe and it felt good.
Right.
That I think that we have to remember, like, you don't have to go back to the constant movement. And it's okay to say no to things and to say like yes to the ones that are the best yeses. And that if you're not in this like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to go do these things, or like ask your kids like, are you really excited about doing soccer? Like, is this something you really want to do,
Right.
or is it
Right.
just because like mom and dad thought it would be fun for you to play soccer and we wanted you to get activity? That like, if it's not something that's a heck yes for the entire family,
Mhm,
then
mhm.
don't do it. And it's okay to like go against the grain and in the norm of not being in all the activities. I
Yeah.
think that that's one thing that we've really taken out of COVID and being in quarantine is Turner's old enough that like he could play soccer, he could do these other, these sports because he's in kindergarten. But I just keep feeling like it's not our best yes.
Yes.
Being committed to having practice and doing stuff every weekend, like it just doesn't feel good. And so in this season, it's a no.
Yeah.
And like to some people, it might be like, well, that sounds like really selfish for your kids. Because yes, he has asked to play soccer, but he's 5.
Yeah.
Like he has so much life. And at 5, like he just needs to go out and play with his friends,
Yes.
and it just has felt really good to really know and look at the calendar of like, okay, if what's on our calendar, is that really our best yes for us for the
Mhm,
weekend?
mhm.
Or like if is going to that like family event gonna suck the life out of us and we really don't want to go, then say no. Like, nope, it doesn't work for our schedule. No one needs to know that you don't have anything else on the calendar.
Right. Right.
It's just that it just
Right.
doesn't work for us. And
So the power of evaluating,
yeah.
reevaluating, life. I feel like I'm in the middle of that right now, Michelle, and so just with my social media, like it is too much. It's too much. So I'm pulling back.
Mhm.
And I believe that this podcast will be my last one for a while. I'm pulling back from that too. And yes, I'll keep going at some point, start them again. But it's really beautiful to have permission to give permission to ourselves to reevaluate and decide what is really important. And I love that saying you have, what's your best yes, and putting that all together and making these decisions so that we don't live a life that is full of regrets, that we have the power to make these choices and to remake choices for this season, for this time. So that's so beautiful you're doing that as a family. I have one final question, but before the final question, I wanted to just see if there was anything else. You've shared so much amazing wisdom.
I think it's just kind of like in what you said was like the perfect of that like, it's okay if like social media isn't filling your cup or not bringing you joy, then like go find what is bringing you joy and do
Mhm.
that. And I'm trying to lean into that too. And it's so hard as business owners to listen to that though, because we know
Yeah.
like, okay, but if I don't post and I don't have this many stories on Instagram, then like I'm not feeding the beast of the algorithm. And, if I'm not doing all these things, I think it's figuring out like which part of my business brings me the most joy and makes me happy, and then do that, because the algorithms are always going to change. There's going to always be a new platform, that somebody creates. Like we're going to be moving, first it was Facebook, and now Facebook, you have to like pay to play. So no one really is on Facebook. So now we're on Instagram, but, and TikTok and all these other things. Like there's going to always constantly be something else and something new. But I just feel like if you can just figure out like what really brings you joy and makes you happy, like keep doing that, because God doesn't put these things on your heart because like he thinks it's fun. He puts them on your heart because like he has a purpose and a reason. And I think for people that are listening and they're like, well, I don't really know what it means to like listen, or I don't hear God. If
Mhm.
you've been hearing something on your heart like over and over, and it's even be something that's like, oh shoot, I should call so and so. Oh
Mhm.
gosh, and it comes up to you again, I should call so and so. And it comes again. It's because God is being like, hey, you know,
So good.
and listening. And that's like one thing that I've really learned too. I was like, if something's coming up to me over and over, it's for a reason. And that when we have these dreams or these ideas of like, hey, I think that I want to do this, start a podcast. Maybe you want to start a podcast and you're thinking to yourself, I don't really know. Should I? Well, I definitely could. Like you probably have the skills, and that thought didn't come to you just, because it came to you for a purpose and a reason and to explore.
Yes. Usually every podcast we talk about how we hear God, how who gets interviewed hears God. And so thank you so much for being even clear. I love that repeated thoughts come through. So I do want to ask you though, have you ever heard the audible voice of God?
When I was told to stay home, I
Okay.
have.
Okay.
Like that is like the first time. And I think I was also in a season of continually learning and seeking him, and that's when I hear him. And there's been times in my life where I'm like, God, even in the past 3 years, like since I heard God say to stay home, that I've been like, God, you're not talking to me anymore. Like you haven't, I just can't hear you. And then I
Mhm.
realize I'm like, well, I haven't really spent any time,
Mhm.
you know,
So
trying
good.
to read
Yeah.
anything, or other than like doing my thing of being on worship team and going to
Mhm.
church. Like
Mhm.
that doesn't always, it's like a two-way
But
street
the
of that.
intimate time, right? The
Yeah.
intimate time.
Yeah,
So
and just
good.
having some quiet time and actually listening. And so I think even just reminding people that sometimes like you'll hear God, and maybe sometimes God's quiet because he doesn't need you. You don't need to hear him. Like he's like, you already know what you need to do.
So good.
And that's kind of where I was in some of this stuff of like, well, what am I'm speaking, God, I'm not hearing you. And he was like, I've already told you. You don't need me to tell you again. Like sometimes I'm definitely that daughter where God is like, listen, how many more times am I gonna have to tell you?
Such a
And
beautiful
then
relationship, yeah.
um so yeah, I think that I've heard God like in that way. And sometimes it's completely clear and you can totally hear him. And sometimes it's just like these little whispers on your heart that
Mhm,
you keep
mhm,
feeling over and
mhm,
over,
mhm.
and just taking action like on those whispers when you feel
Yes,
them.
so good. Yes. Well, I know people are gonna wanna connect with you and listen to your podcast because 'cause you're going strong, you're not taking a break, so
No, yeah.
that's awesome. My listeners can go over and start listening to you, and also you have so many you launched just about 2 weeks before me, so
Mhm.
and for a while you were doing 2 a week, right?
Yeah, for quite a
Mm,
while. And
yeah,
then it was just didn't really feel
yeah,
super
yeah.
sustainable, or that it was serving. And so, but then like every now and then I release a second one,
Yes.
or someone comes up and they've asked to be on the podcast, and I'm like, well, because I have it all recorded and planned out till December. But every now and then I'm like, okay, well, this feels right. And so I add a second one in, of just doing what feels good in the moment.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Mhm. And I love it that there's no podcast police. So we
Yeah.
can we're really in charge of that. But how can they connect with you, listen to your podcast, all of that? And I'll certainly put it in the show notes. But if you want to share that for the listeners, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so my podcast is called The Busy Years, and it's where motherhood and business meet. And so we talk a lot about either a topic that has to do with motherhood or a topic that has to do with business. But all of the women that I talk to on my podcast have all either started or scaled their businesses substantially in the little years of motherhood. And so it's just
Mm.
really encouraging women to move forward with your dreams in the little years of motherhood, no matter what that looks like. So it's called the Busy Years Podcast, and I'm mainly on Instagram. So there's a podcast Instagram that's at the Busy Years Podcast. And then I have my own personal Instagram, which is just Michelle Ann, Ann, Hagen, Hagen. And I just share a lot of whatever's on my heart that day. Honestly, on Instagram, it's one of those things where, in business, they tell us like, okay, well, you should have it planned out. But I very much am just like, God is kind of I'm feeling like today, God wants me to talk about this. And
Mhm.
so that's what I just kind of post. And so it's just a place for encouragement for women. I do have like some business education on sales that I talk about on there, but it's just a lot of my hope and my goal is to help women feel like they're not alone in the season of what they're in, and that other women are feeling or doing what you're doing, and that you're not a bad mom for chasing your dreams in motherhood.
So good. I love that. Well, this has been so beautiful. I've loved it, and I know my audience is going to love it. So, Michelle, my mama was a very special person in my life, and she had a saying in the last few years of her life that she would say, and it really wasn't a question, but I've decided to end each of my podcasts with this question that she often asks, and really as a statement: how good can God be? So, what would your answer be to that today?
He's as good as you will let him be.
Mm,
Um, because as human, God gives us the choice to accept what he's going to give us, or to be like, no, I don't want that. um so I think that it's as good as you'll let him be, as if you let him like take the reins of the hard things, or you let him take the reins of like, okay, just like with us, like, okay, God, you said you were going to financially provide, you said you're going to always provide. And even in COVID, we had jobs lost, and I think it was just letting God be good. And God was like, listen, I've already told you, I've got it taken care of. And when you let him do the things, it's how much you let him do in
wow.
your life is what he'll provide.
So good. Love it. Wow, Michelle. Well, it's been just an honor and a pleasure. And I'm so thankful for you. I'm so thankful God put a holy intersection with you and I to connect. And now, yeah, I mean, we're friends forever. It's not ending.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for letting me be on today and sharing my story. And yes, I'm so thankful for you and your, motherly advice that I feel like you give, and that you give so many women, that I feel like you just speak into women so well as well.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, you have a blessed day, girl.
Thank you.
Plant a seed, no one knows what it will be. Watch it grow, watch it grow, watch it grow, watch it grow. You're small,
listening to this episode of Small Beginnings with Sarah. I pray you've been encouraged and inspired by the stories that you have heard today. Please follow me on my social medias, including Instagram at Acts18Blessings, Facebook at Acts18Blessings, and on my website, sarahthurman.com. You can help others start their own small beginnings by subscribing to my podcast and leaving a review. One sentence is wonderful, and it really helps share the word.